the offering, made with reverence, with bended knee, upraised arms, holding a soul full of flowers to the heavens, to the gods of beauty and passion, harmony, expression, fulfilling the days to overspilling with such miraculous gifts. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in, for bringing your interest and adding your presence to show 182, coming to you live from the soft-spoken coast of Rhode Island. This is your poet and guiding spirit in the poetosphere, Colin Goedecke, a voice here and elsewhere for living our days more fully, more lively, more poetically. Last week's broadcast was Recess, from the childhood school day literal to the adult work and life metaphorical. That precious break time, playtime, allotted and gladly taken free time, self-time. And looking at it with both a familiar lens and a freshly conscious one. Encouraging us to break out of any hard and fast mold or being molded by others to conform, to fit in like a square peg. Instead, cultivating and enjoying our beautiful, vital individuality. This week, being humble, the many values and virtues of finding and embodying humility in ourselves, appreciating it in our lives, and encouraging it in our society. A vital quality of being, since thinking men and women appeared here on earth. The people, moments, and models of true humility that greatly move and inspire us, or quietly move and inspire us. From modest and soft-spoken souls in our days, in our communities, to humble and in time rightly fabled figures the world has witnessed, whose greatness rested much on their humbleness as they carried out their work of service to humanity, often in the face of towering challenges, opposing odds. So I've created a show for us of cultural commentary, quotes, poetry, and anecdotes to explore and reflect on this theme. I hope it speaks to you. Let's see what we discover together and what it inspires, not only now as we go, but beyond. And I thought we might begin at the hearth in the depth of winter. The hearth. The old oven in the cold night kitchen, whose wide mouth I open to warm my chilled hands. As I cook a simple supper, sip a humble glass of wine. I feel sure, the same kind of comfort others through time, farmers to storytellers, hermits and wayfarers felt around the good fortune of a sheltered fire and the promise of body-filling food on a deep winter's eve by a welcomely glowing hearth. In Wilcox Park, I call it an heirloom park here in Westerly, Rhode Island, on the recent autumnal equinox. Here in the atmosphere of elemental sounds, of rain, of wind in the trees swaying together in this heirloom park, of a handful of children playing together without umbrellas on the bright green field of yielding grass, on this first day of fall, of the earth balancing with the heavens with the earth, and maybe more than a few of us feeling or finding our balance here in between. The farmer-poet Wendell Berry, from his decades-long Sabbath series, drawn from his ritual of walking his farm on most Sundays in Kentucky and letting inspiration have its way with him. Sabbath poem number 1. If there are a, quote, chosen few, then I am not one of them. If an elect, well, then I have not been elected. I am one who is knocking at the door. I am one whose foot is on the bottom rung. But I know that heaven's bottom rung is heaven, though the ladder is standing on the earth where I work by day and at night sleep with my head upon a stone. Sabbath poem number 9. I go by a field where once I cultivated a few poor crops. It is now covered with young trees, for the forest that belongs here has come back and reclaimed its own. And I think of all the effort I have wasted and all the time, and of how much joy I took in that failed work, and how much it taught me. For in so failing, I learned something of my place, something of myself. And now I welcome back the trees. Thank you, Wendell Berry. His other Sabbath poems are quite marvelous that were done over a number of years. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "A great man is always willing to be little." Rick Warren from The Purpose-Driven Life, What on Earth Am I Here For?, said, "True humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less." David Brooks, The Road to Character is his book on the art of stumbling, resume virtues versus eulogy virtues, and the humility code of living a meaningful life. I felt this extremely relevant and resonant, and something I wanted to have and lead in at the beginning with for us. So here are some slices of that. We are all stumblers, and the beauty and meaning of life are in the stumbling, in recognizing the stumbling and trying to become more graceful as the years go by. The stumbler scuffs through life, a little off balance here and there, sometimes lurching, sometimes falling to her knees, but the stumbler faces her imperfect nature, her mistakes and weaknesses with unvarnished honesty, with the opposite of squeamishness. She is sometimes ashamed of the perversities in her nature, the selfishness, the self-deceit, the occasional desire to put lower loves above higher ones. But humility offers self-understanding. When we acknowledge that we screw up and feel the gravity of our limitations, we find ourselves challenged and stretched with a serious foe to overcome and transcend. The stumbler is made whole by this struggle. It's a moral logic, not an economic one. You have to give to receive. You have to surrender to something outside yourself to gain strength within yourself. You have to conquer your desire to get what you crave. Success leads to the greatest failure, which is pride. Failure leads to the greatest success, which is humility and learning. In order to fulfill yourself, you have to forget yourself. In order to find yourself, you have to lose yourself. We live in a society that encourages us to think about how to have a great career, but leaves many of us inarticulate about how to cultivate the inner life. The competition to succeed and win admiration is so fierce that it becomes all-consuming. The noise of fast and shallow communications makes it harder to hear the quieter sounds that emanate from the depths. We live in a culture that teaches us to promote and advertise ourselves and to master the skills required for success. But that gives little encouragement to humility, sympathy, and honest self-confrontation, which are necessary for building character. We don't live for happiness. We live for holiness. Day to day we seek out pleasure, but deep down, human beings are endowed with moral imagination. All human beings seek to lead lives not just of pleasure, but of purpose, righteousness, and virtue. Proposition 1 defines the goal of life. The long road to character begins with an accurate understanding of our nature, and the core of that understanding is that we are flawed creatures. We have an innate tendency towards selfishness and overconfidence. We have a tendency to see ourselves as the center of the universe, as if everything revolves around us. Although we are flawed creatures, we're also splendidly endowed. We are divided within ourselves, both fearfully and wonderfully made. We thus have the capacity to struggle with ourselves. Something heroic about a person in struggle with herself or himself, strained on the rack of conscience, suffering torments, yet staying alive and growing stronger, sacrificing a worldly success for the sake of an inner victory. Pride is the central vice. It blinds us to the reality of our divided nature, and blinds us to our own weaknesses, and misleads us into thinking we're better than we are. We are all ultimately saved by grace. No good life is possible unless it is organized around a vocation. If you try to use your work to serve yourself, you'll find your ambitions and expectations will forever run ahead and you'll never be satisfied. If you try to serve the community, you'll always wonder if people appreciate you enough. But if you serve work that is intrinsically compelling and focused just on being excellent at that, you'll wind up serving yourself and the community obliquely. A vocation is not found by looking within and finding your passion. It's found by looking without and asking what life is asking of us. What problem is addressed by an activity you intrinsically enjoy? David Brooks, The Road to Character. Many thanks for that. Well, think of the greatly humble and humbly great people you know in your world. Here are some of mine. This is for Mike Bernstein on his 84th birthday. Truths. Beautiful truths. I know so many about you, 40 years worth, and feel called today to call some out, sound some out, pour some out, like your lifelong integrity, rock solid as Everest or Gibraltar, like the deep fidelity of your friendship, your boundless capacity for learning, for growing, for caring so greatly about so much that matters, for mentoring others, for generously mentoring me, for staying centered on the light over the shadows, the joys over the sorrows, despite the slings and arrows of life trials and losses, the world's challenges, and maybe the most beautiful truths of your humility, untrumped by ego, what we find in all true masters, the ones moving quietly, modestly, sometimes invisibly among us. Yes, the unvarnished fineness of your humanity, the enduring inspiration of your rare man on earth equanimity. Love out to him and honoring this day, this night. Another one for a very dear friend of long-standing, Roger Wu. The heart of the master is the heart of the world. It beats for all humanity, for all possibility, for all earthly and ascended masters, ascending apprentices. Its chambers hold the wonders of a life evolvingly and exuberantly lived. Its vessels flow with wisdom and vitality, like wild and ancient rivers through the landscape of the body. To all deep listeners, its valves sound forth strongly, like ocean waves rolling ashore. Distinctly, like the calls of an owl filling the silence of the woods. A heart the master lives from, humbly, ever grateful for the gifts of his mastery. Love out to the master, Master Wu. And one more for my brother in adventure, Richard Allen, on his 80th birthday last year. We'll be seeing him again soon, I hope, here for a visit from Maine, coming down to Rhode Island down the coast. Richard the Tender-Hearted, a lion of a man with a lamb of a soul, whose realm has been the world of spirit, whose reign of self, rule of thumb, has been strong and lifelong, whose role has been to nobly, ever humbly roam the byways of this land, as a seeker of heartfulness, as a voice of gentleness, a faithful model of kindness, a beautiful embodier and generous bestower of tenderness. Love out to that good man. Well, I'm going to have a sip of water and then ask you some questions, if I may. Questions for us, for you, as we go about humility. Maybe beginning with what it means to you, how it's meaningful to you, humility, being humble. You can think about that a little now, but later on too, I hope. Where does it play a part in your daily life? How has it shaped your character? When in your life have you been greatly humbled? What brought that about? And what was the outcome of that humbling? Who are some of the most humble people you know? Maybe the most inspiringly modest or the most beautifully soft-spoken. What happens when you forget your humility? What would it be like to live in a world where there is no humility? I'd venture to say we're seeing that scenario happening before our very eyes in facets of our society, of our world right now. And the fallout from it is wildly destructive and disturbing on countless levels. What say you about that? How has it been, has it felt to experience someone who's the opposite of humble, who's arrogant, self-important, superior, conceited, entitled, thoughtless? Are there any books or songs or stories that have helped you feel more deeply into the nature of humility, specifically your humility, or to realize the importance of being humble? Or some experience maybe of another culture whose people are especially and traditionally humble in their natures and their outlook on life. What advice from your life experience would you give to a younger person about the virtue of humility, if you could give them just one observation or bit of wisdom? Are we giving enough focus to supporting and promoting and sowing the seeds of humility, individually and collectively? Some things I'm musing on with you and myself, friends, and for you to muse on beyond our time here. From Nick Cabe's Red Hand Files, issue 252, in answer to a question he was asked from a 20-year-old about values. And he said back, what you and your generation can do in order to live fulfilling lives in a bizarre and temporary world that does not share your values, my suggestion would be instead to look to two qualities that will improve your life immeasurably. The first is humility. Humility amounts to an understanding that the world is not divided into good and bad people, but rather it is made up of all manner of individuals, each broken in their own way, each caught up in the common human struggle, and each having the capacity to do both terrible and beautiful things. If we truly comprehend and acknowledge that we are all imperfect creatures, we find that we become more tolerant and accepting of others' shortcomings, and the world appears less dissonant, less isolating, less threatening. Cheryl Strayed, Strayed, her advice to an aspiring writer on faith and humility. This is from her book, Tiny Beautiful Things. Her wonderful book, by the way. Advice on love and life from Dear Sugar. So I've just pulled a little bit from this for you and us. On her first book, she said, "When I was done writing it, I understood that things happened just as they were meant to, that I couldn't have written my book before I did. I simply wasn't capable of doing so, either as a writer or a person. To get to the point I had to get to write my first book, I had to do everything I did in my 20s. I had to write a lot of sentences that never turned into anything and stories that never miraculously formed a novel. I had to read voraciously and compose exhaustive entries in my journals. I had to waste time and grieve my mother and come to terms with my childhood and have stupid and sweet and scandalous sexual relationships and grow up. In short, I had to gain the self-knowledge that Flannery O'Connor mentions in her quote about humility. And once I got there, I had to make a hard stop at self-knowledge's first product, humility. Do you know what that is, Sweet Pea? To be humble. The word comes from the Latin word humilis and humus, to be down low, to be of the earth, to be on the ground. That's where I went when I wrote the last word of my first book. Straight onto the cool tile floor to weep. I sobbed and I wailed and I laughed through my tears. I didn't get up for half an hour. I was too happy and grateful to stand. I had turned 35 a few weeks before. I was 2 months pregnant with my first child. I didn't know if people would think my book was good or bad or horrible or beautiful, and I didn't care. I only knew I no longer had 2 hearts beating in my chest. I'd pulled one out with my own bare hands. I'd suffered. I'd given it everything I had. I'd stopped being grandiose. I'd lowered myself to the notion that the absolute only thing that mattered was getting that extra beating heart out of my chest, which meant I had to write my book, my very possibly mediocre book, my very possibly never going to be published book, my absolutely nowhere in league with the writers I'd admired so much that I practically memorized their sentences book. It was only then, when I humbly surrendered, that I was able to do the work I needed to do. Thank you very much, Cheryl Strayed, for that. For all of us. Joyce Sidman, Grass. I grow in places others can't, where wind is high and water scant. I drink the rain, I eat the sun. Before the prairie winds I run. I see, I sprout, I grow, I creep, and in the ice and snow I sleep. On steppe or veldt or pampas dry beneath the grand, enormous sky, I make my humble bladed bed. And where there's level ground, I spread. Thank you, Joyce Sidman. Here's one of mine from Convent Station, New Jersey, June 2016, dedicated to Chris and Nancy. Luffing. Living leaves of bright yellow. Large, sunny, sans souci butterflies float and flutter singly and doubly just beneath the June-green treetops, all shaggy and shady on their broomsticks of smooth, gray, spreading wood, amphitheatered out around the cedar plank stage where I sit in simple silence, seeing and feeling the luffing motion of the morning. East Hampton, New York, July 2001, Old Beach Lane. Cresting the hill into deep blue sea, a moment of recurring revelation where ocean meets earth and fills any body with simple wonder, with a silent, fathomless, soul-satisfying sigh. From the Yucatan, Mexico, 1999. El sol es rey. The sun is king. The high noon sun dwarfs every man, overshadowing him on one hand, shrinking his shape on the other, putting him in proportion to his place in the kingdom of things. It's a piece by the Uruguayan writer Eduardo Galeano. The moon calls to the sea, and the sea calls to the humble stream, which flows on and on from wherever it springs in search of the sea, no matter how far away it may lie. And growing as it flows, the stream rushes on until no mountain can hold back its surge. The sun calls to the grapevine, which spreads and rises in its hunger for sunlight. The early morning air calls forth the smells of the awakening city, the aroma of newly baked bread, of newly brewed coffee, and the aromas fill the air and possess it. Night calls to the water lily, and at the stroke of midnight those white points of light burst open in the river, opening the darkness, penetrating it, breaking it apart, and swallowing it up. Thank you, Eduardo Galeano. Yes, nature has its own innate and beautiful humility, too. It also has the power to put us in our places like the sun at certain moments, in the great scheme of things, I would say. This is from New York City, October 29th, 2012. So almost to the day, 2 days, 21 years back, for Hurricane Sandy landing on the head of Manhattan. Hurricane. Atlantic. Oceanic. Tempestuous. A walloping cocktail. Marvelous supervillain. Great locomotive, whirlwind boxer, HMS Destroyer. A John Ford-worthy melodrama, rock festival, leering bellow, a smoking pipe, hard a blow, water spouter, roller coaster. Tipping the Beaufort scale, tipping a 500-mile-wide hat over the bent heads of autumn trees and towns, buttoned-down cities, tucked-up citizens, hushing and humbling all. Hurricane. Well, the next piece of mine I'd like to play instead of read. It was musically scored, beautifully, I feel, musically scored to original music by a wonderful younger composer, Jacob Friedman. So let me see if I can just cue that up for us right now. The Elements. The elements are here to connect us to the pure power and wonder of nature, its presence, its miraculousness. From the winds to the rains, the fiercest heat to the wildest cold, and to all the purely elemental, powerful, wonderful inside us, inside our bodies, spirits, imaginations. The forces of outer and inner nature that challenge and inspire us, surround and speak to us, to every man, woman, and child among us. These elements, these firmaments of contrast and contest, of past, present, and humbling, ennobling energy. Well, how about that? Marvelous. And I send out thanks to Jacob out there in the ether. Jacob Friedman, much gratitude. And for other marvelous, also equally marvelous pieces that he composed music for, scored some of my other poems too, including ones for the Olympics and the America's Cup through the Truce Foundation, where some of you know I serve as Poet Laureate and have since 2017. Well, let's ponder, perhaps, if you would, or like to, all the events that bring us to some place of humility, some deeper humbleness in our lives, and how that winds up supporting us on our way. This is Elizabeth Gilbert reflecting on the death of her partner. I have learned that grief is a force of energy that cannot be controlled or predicted. It comes and goes on its own schedule. Grief does not obey our plans or your wishes, your plans or your wishes. Grief will do whatever it wants to you, whenever it wants to. In that regard, grief has a lot in common with love. The only way that I can, quote, handle grief, then, is the same way that I, quote, handle love, by not, quote, handling it, by bowing down before its power in complete humility. Thank you, Elizabeth Gilbert. So well said. And I think given all the grief in the world and the grieving people are doing about losing loved ones, maybe many more than usual, is maybe we can find more humility in ourselves and more love. Yeah. There's a quote from a very soulful yogini that I know. If you're unable to access your humility, you severely limit your openness to consciousness. I like that very much, and I was thinking about it also in addition, another way around. Putting it another way is when you enter your humility, you greatly expand your openness to places of consciousness. Maybe you found that to be true for yourselves. What about humbling places? Yes. What, maybe you've had experiences of those, ones we inhabit or ones we experience as we travel or move about. This is Lou, L-E-W, Welch. Lou Welch's poem, Chicago Poem. I lived here nearly 5 years before I could meet the Middle Western day with anything approaching dignity. It's a place that lets you understand why the Bible is the way it is. Proud people cannot live here. The land's too flat. Ugly, sullen, and big, it pounds men down past humbleness. They stoop at 35, possibly cringing from the heavy and terrible sky. In country like this, there can be no God but Yahweh. In the mills and refineries of its south side, Chicago passes its natural gas in flames, bouncing like Bunsen's from stacks 100 feet high. The stench stabs at your eyeballs. The whole sky green and yellow backdrop for the skeleton steel of a bombed-out town. Remember the movies in grammar school? The goggled men doing strong things in showers of steel spark? The dark screen, cracking light, and the furnace door opening with a blast of orange like a sunset? Or an orange? It was photographed by a fairy, thrilled as a girl or a Nazi who wished there were people behind that door, hence the remote beauty. But Sievers, whose old man spent most of his life in there, remembers a black man in a red T-shirt pissing into the black sand. It was 5 years until I could afford to recognize the ferocity. Friends helped me. Then I put some love into my house. Finally, I found some quiet lakes and a farm where they let me shoot pheasant. Standing in the boat one night, I watched the lake go absolutely flat, smaller than raindrops, and only here and there the feeding rings of fish were visible 100 yards away, and the bluegill, caught that afternoon, lifted from its northern lake like a tropical. Jewel at its ear, belly gold so bright you'd swear he had a light in there. His color faded with his life, a small green fish. All things considered, it's a gentle and undemanding planet, even here. Far gentler here than any of a dozen other places. The trouble is always and only with what we build on top of it. There's nobody else to blame. You can't fix it, and you can't make it go away. It does no good appealing to some ill-invented thunderer brooding above some unimaginable crag. It's ours. Right down to the last small hinge, it all depends for its existence only and utterly upon our sufferance. Driving back, I saw Chicago rising in its gases, and I knew again that Never will the man be made to stand against this pitiless, unparalleled monstrosity. It snuffles on the beach of its great lake like a blind red rhinoceros. It's already running us down. You can't fix it. You can't make it go away. I don't know what you're going to do about it, but I know what I'm going to do about it. I'm just going to walk away from it. Maybe a small part of it will die if I'm not around feeding it anymore. Chicago poem. Thank you, Lou Welch. New poem, new poet to me. What about the, seeing and the shift of seeing and understanding life's seasoning and later time of age and what that can bring? This is Edward Hirsch, early Sunday morning. I used to mock my father and his chums for getting up early on Sunday morning and drinking coffee at a local spot, but now I'm one of those chums. No one cares about my old humiliations, but they go on dragging through my sleep like a string of empty tin cans rattling behind an abandoned car. It's like this. Just when you think you have forgotten that red-haired girl who left you stranded in a parking lot 40 years ago, you wake up early enough to see her disappearing around the corner of your dream on someone else's motorcycle, roaring onto the highway at sunrise. And so now I'm sitting in a dimly lit cafe full of early morning risers where the windows are covered with soot and the coffee is warm and bitter. Thank you, Edward Hirsch. Rita Dove, Leave Taking, from the Retirement Annals. I was sitting at home with my daughter, who was young again, a child with a child's wish to do things over and over. So when she named an old film even I liked, we popped in the disc and sat back to watch until daughter and living room faded. That is, I kept watching, but the movie began to dream. I became a stranger set down on Earth in the late 20th century at a pool in midsummer. Everyone with towels slung over their shoulders, children splashing each other, cackling as they kicked the blue water. Beyond this activity, a field stretched green until it reached an end and began to climb, gently sloping skyward like a runway to heaven. I was waiting. I knew they were coming. Over the hill, I knew the moment I stepped out onto the grass, I too would disappear. What a curious sensation, being the stranger. If I thought about it too long, I would be seen for what I was. But try too hard to blend in, I might forget myself and miss my pickup and be stranded forever. Oh, I liked humans well enough. Though they were immature and the old ones dreaming the same dreams to the end, the young ones trying to forget, they were headed there too, always fretting over their bodies, working out, cursing and cooing. Yes, I was homesick. I walked toward the slope, towel draped around my neck like a human, but not thinking of humanity, not fitting in. I heard something, a gasp, and glanced back at a child in a shiny pink suit who stood staring, nudging her mother as she pointed my way. No, I thought, not now. I could feel them. I whipped my towel in the air as if snapping at gnats, but kept walking. And then the dune buggy puttered over the hill, just like in the movies, and just like anyone might, I stepped onto the grass. Suddenly all the humans were staring at me, or maybe the idea of us before I was zipped up and we were lifting into the universe, pouring into our true shapes, translucence, then nothing at all. Thank you, Rita Dove, for that. Ray Armantrout, New Intelligence. Stars are the campfires of exiles. Language exists to pull things close. Stop that. Communications are being monitored. Collusion is forbidden. Humanity will be punished with the profusion of new jargons. Inverted in glass, a white cup invents the underworld. Fog thins to chiffon, nylon, Easter. In the universe next door, I'm gone, and the shadows of the leaves of the elm I had pulled down still make a fuss over the earth. Well, I found something wonderfully modest about this next poem by T.J. Clark afterwards. The sea and the wind and the half-light clearing its throat of pebbles, cloud shadows coming down the mountain with the steady speed of a paddle wheel, light on the foothills already gone, so that you need not look at the seminary on top of the tallest, fat, square, and gray as a helping of lard The roar from the beach stopped suddenly, as if waves lost their nerve. One dead branch of olive higher than Cygnus from where I sit, its fingers pressed against the aquarium of the sky. Then the sudden humanity of a bell struck twice more, the rope rattling in its socket. Earlier on I had colored the mountainside, crudely but fairly, getting at least the fall of the scree right and the rasp of sun across schist. Well, almost. I look down at the painting now and try to decide if the scene looks ready for the bell to sound. No scene ever is. Danger and chance are written on the face of things. Grass fires, fog, fault lines, winds from the north, clumps of arthritic pines protesting, havoc among the flowering onions, ghosts, and the world descending to waterlessness and unwelcome summer. But not recurrence, not nature, not the order of service. A snarling of pebbles up from the beach again, as if the waves have decided they might still win. Then the bell from the village. The ropes, dry cough. Thank you, T.J. Clark. Well, back in 2016, I had to go within, to cloister myself in certain inner ways to shape a next life passage and purpose, explore a calling. This poem came in the midst of that. A monastery of one. Self-cloistered. Apart, like all monks originally. In this case by chance, also some choice. With a place reserved for poetry, my own form of oratory. Curiously, in this green dwelling, close to the real thing, a neighboring convent of unseen nuns, and a warrior monk brother with an ancient Okinawan moniker. An airy cloister of contemplation, a welcome hermitage with a wealth of one self, one soul, if slighter right now in worldly goods, which I'd never trade away for a kingdom of almighty dollars, even if granted the wish. Though sharing the sacred body and spirit as sacredly, sensually, sourcefully with another, as I did for a kind of lifetime before entering this sanctuary, would be a great joy. I know the day will come, before many seasons turn, when I return to the wider, weatherful world. I believe with more wisdom, more humility, more wonder. And this, friends, is what came about in time. And here I am. And maybe you can relate. Maybe you have been in some monastic mode, some time somewhere in your life also. Well, more of gratitude, of even the simplest kind, as I had back in the winter of 2019. I'm grateful for heat. In the bare-treed heart of this winter, in the late hours of this wind-chilled night, as I sit by myself with some books and some thoughts at the silent kitchen table, grateful in a viscerally humble way, feeling thankful just for the warmth on my ankles as I hold them close to the small, purring heater. For the blankets I will soon sleep under, curl and dream under. For the heat of the heart of this, my brother's house, that has sheltered me from many inclemencies, swaddles me now as I sit through nights of shivering life insistencies. And wherever we live, may we honor our place of living. This is one of mine from at the Watch Hill Inn, Watch Hill, Rhode Island, December 2020, for 38 Bay Street. It's still home. However simple or humble, it's still home. Sweet home. There are programs I've spoken of my wilderness journey in Alaska. And for me, back in 2009, it was a welcomely humbling experience, especially how the immensity of nature there, like the fjords, awed me. Yes. The awesomeness was greatly humbling, beautifully, welcomely humbling. This was at anchor in Sanford Cove, the Inside Passage, Southeast Alaska, July 2009. Whiskey and ice. The tip of an iceberg sits in a bowl on the small table in the cabin. Pure and ancient ice, at least 100 times older than our 12-year-old single malt, that we chip into 3 glasses and sip slowly, reverently. Yes, gratitude goes hand in hand with humility. And where else can we be and feel and express gratitude, friends? I do it daily and often, maybe you too. For the milk, frothed and poured into my morning coffee, and the milkman who delivered it, bottled and cold to the grocery store, and the one who placed it on the shelf, and the other who checked it out with a smile. For the dairy farmer who raised and milked the soft and white and brindled cows, the cows that gave it to the farmer's pail, the pastures of grass and clover that fed the cows, and the barn that sheltered them. For the rain and sun that helped the pastures grow and green, the clouds that gave the rain, and the sky that held them up, and the earth that gave the fertile soil for the dream and streams of milk to even begin. Thank you. That's from my working project, the Book of Thank Yous of other ones. We'll let you know when that comes forth. Don Patterson, The Error. As the bird is to the air, and the whale is to the sea, so man is to his dream. His world is just the glare of the world's utility returned by his eye beam. Each self-reflecting mind is in this manner destined to forget its element, and this is why we find, however deep we listen, that the skies are silent. Via the Marginalian, as we're coming now into our last sharings and musings for this day and this week, on the search for a new humility. This is Václav Havel on reclaiming our human interconnectedness in a globalized yet divided world. This is from his book, The Art of the Impossible, Politics as Morality in Practice. I thought he had a few good thoughts we ought to take in. For Havel, the common language of science, any real movement toward healing the ruptures of our natural interconnectedness lies not in reverting to ancient religions, but in integrating the achievements of reason with the core values of the human spirit. He invited us to step out of our human perspective, as Rachel Carson did, and he said, only a dreamer can believe that the solution lies in curtailing the progress of civilization in some way or other. The main task in the coming era is something else, a radical renewal of our sense of responsibility. Our conscience must catch up to our reason, otherwise we are lost. It is my profound belief that there is only one way to achieve this. We must divest ourselves of our egotistical anthropocentrism, our habit of seeing ourselves as masters of the universe who can do whatever occurs to us. We must discover a new respect for what transcends us, for the universe, for the earth, for nature, for life, and for reality. Our respect for other people, for other nations, and for other cultures can only grow from a humble respect for the cosmic order and from an awareness that we are part of it, that we share in it, and that nothing of what we do is lost, but rather becomes part of the eternal memory of being where it is judged. Wonderful. Thank you for that, Václav Havel. Interconnectedness, yes, what a gift it is and can be when we have it. Naomi Shihab Nye's poem, Supple Cord. My brother, in his small white bed, held one end. I tugged the other to signal I was still awake. We could have spoken, could have sung to one another. We were in the same room for 5 years, but the soft cord with its little frayed ends connected us in the dark, gave comfort even if we had been bickering all day. When he fell asleep first and his end of the cord dropped to the floor, I missed him terribly, though I could hear his even breath, and we had such long and separate lives ahead. Thank you, Naomi Shihab Nye. I know much of her work, but not that one. That was new for our program to me. Billy Collins, The Parade. And I came across this, felt it was so apropos, The Parade. How exhilarating it was to march along the great boulevards in the sunflash of trumpets and under all the waving flags. The flag of ambition, the flag of love. So many of us streaming along, all of humanity really, moving in perfect step, yet each lost in the room of a private dream. How stimulating the scenery of the world, the rows of roadside trees, the huge curtain of the sky. How endless it seemed until we veered off the broad turnpike into a pasture of high grass, headed toward the dizzying cliffs of mortality. Generation after generation, we keep shouldering forward until we step off the lip into space. And I should not have to remind you that little time is given here to rest on a wayside bench, to stop and bend to the wildflowers, or to study a bird on a branch. Not when the young are always shoving from behind, not when the old keep tugging us forward, pulling on our arms with all their feeble strength. Thank you, Billy Collins. What models do we have in nature that show us humility? What about the stars? Speaks the star. Through time, space, histories. Simply giving itself, sharing its light. Its distant yet deeply present peace, quiet through each night. Asking nothing in return. Getting everything in a return of simple, eternal wonder. In the once Trinity German Lutheran Church on DeGraw Street, Cobble Hill, Brooklyn, May 2016. Thank you, Theobald, for Theobald Engelhardt, for so worshipfully architecting, so Engelharting, the now pewless church where I sit to compose, where reverent Lutheran Germans sat together a century ago to pray. Maybe my poems and their prayers are not far apart, shared meditations on the great and small glories of the world, on living into life in a state of grace. And next to last, another from the Yucatan, from Mexico. Baptism by the sea. A simple, sudden baptism from the heavens, an anointing of rain sponged up from the sea and squeezed out from the clouds, onto our heads, faces, and forms, sprinkled with grace, received with gratefulness. The sky dark with mystery, the ocean sacred in its aqueous inner glow, from depths we cannot fathom. And last for now, friends, till we're together again over these airwaves, these heart waves. In the great scheme of things, between and around the sweeps of history, the leaps of science, the frontier crossings of technology, the arcing and blending of cultures and philosophies, are the epically simple wonders of loving and being loved, seen, heard, breaking bread with friends, finding meaning in each day, feeling moments of sheer aliveness, wholeness, radiant here-ness, appreciating all the gifts, the remarkable, irreplaceable gifts of yourself and this heavenly, earthly life. I thank you again, friends, for leaning in, thinking and feeling in, for sharing this musing time. All appreciation, too, for those who share this and other show links with friends. Word of mouth is our best friend. I invite your comments from listening to hear what speaks to you. I always like to know. I also invite your contributions to help support these free weekly programs that I create with great care and creative spark to engage and illuminate you. Is there a theme you'd like a future broadcast on? If so, you can always send me an email with your suggestion, colin@thepoetosphere.com. And what about your experience of this show? And being humble. What arose in your mind or heart or spirit while you were listening? And if you are, by the way, making a contribution, thank you so much. You can do so by Venmo to Fivefold, FIVEFOLD @pipeline.com, or by PayPal to the same email. Or you can mail a check along to me to P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891. Or donate through my site, thepoetorialist.com, by way of the Donate tab. For those newly here, patrons can at times privately host or sponsor me as a working poet in residence in the U.S. or beyond to create a new flight of poetic art dedicated to you, if that's you. And if it is, email me to explore. Meanwhile, you can hear all the broadcasts online, on YouTube and elsewhere, on the Floating Poetry playlist. And if you like, you can subscribe to my channel, to my YouTube channel there, to get show notifications. You can also explore, as a visitor or subscriber, the Poetosphere, an oasis I'm exuberantly guiding for seekers of greater aliveness, thepoetosphere.com, exuberantly and I would say humbly. It's a source of enlivening, inspiring, and encouraging micro-experiences and conversations and contemplations, all of them among a community of kindred spirits, of fellow possibilitarians. Meanwhile, I hope you'll lean in here soon again. Until then, dear listeners, let's cultivate deeper humility in ourselves, in our lives, more modesty, more reverence and awe for nature and our humble place in it, as but one part of its great and vast mosaic. Each of us like a single star in a constellation of humanity and an incredible galaxy of life, wonder, and grace. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.